And if you don't mind, I would love to talk about that presentation. And I just want to point out that when I become interested in a topic or in something, I will, queue up some podcasts. I'll listen to them as I'm walking around my neighborhood. I might watch a video or two. And for me, that'll kind of do it. And I'll learn about that thing. For you, you go back to college.
I actually
Holy
literally
smokes.
did for this one.
Wow.
Because sleep has been something that I've been interested in for a really long time. Before I even found Carnivore, I had started deep diving into sleep because I was really interested in this wacky idea that you might be able to sleep less if you do it more frequently around the clock. So there's this whole idea of polyphasic sleeping, and the Uberman schedule sort of fallen out of favor, but it was a really big fad in around 2006, and I was super interested in it. Um, Partly because I was overwhelmed with parenting and wanting to also continue studying and doing all the things that I wanted to do. And it was the first time in my life after having children that I felt like I couldn't do it all. um, so I thought maybe this would be the key. And I was never able to get that together. But in the course of learning about that, I learned that short sleep can be a treatment for depression, but it's a miserable kind of treatment because it's completely unsustainable. I mean, people say keto is unsustainable, but sleep deprivation is definitely unsustainable. Um, so I had this in the back of my mind for a long time, and it was something I always wanted to return to. And then a couple, I guess in 2019, no, 2020, I had started, something got me thinking about it again, and I thought, I really want to find out what is the state of the art in sleep research today. So I did. I looked up the course catalog at CU Boulder, and I got myself enrolled in a graduate level course in sleep physiology and learned as much as I can with now the knowledge about ketogenic diets. So the whole time I was thinking, what are the interactions that are going on here, and how can I apply this knowledge to something that I've developed another expertise in?
Amazing. I love.
So
That's awesome. I love the divergence of these two things. I think anecdotally, a lot of us have had different experiences with sleep, and I've heard a lot. I went carnivore, now I need less sleep than I did before. I feel like I've got better energy. Um, I'm so curious to learn what you learned in school. What have we learned about sleep? Because honestly, I think most people still just think sleep is the off switch. Not really much is going on. We're just kind of chilled out and we're going to rest for the next day. But there's a lot that's going on, and I'm wondering what things you've learned about what sleep even is and what it does.
yeah, well, it it's both completely known that that's not true, but at the same time we only really have theories about what sleep is. So um, in order to know that we need sleep, the real reason we know that we need sleep is because of what happens if you don't get it. So from you can take that and make inferences about what it's actually doing. So sleep is homeostatically controlled. We know that because the longer you go, the more irresistible the urge is to fall asleep. And in fact, at a certain point, you can't not fall asleep, right? So there's something that's going on that's saying that's like pushing us towards sleep. And um, what it actually does is kind of complex, and there are many different ideas about it. But there are two main different things that happen during sleep. There's slow wave sleep and there's REM sleep, and they have different roles. And slow wave sleep is what's considered deep sleep, where you're it's really kind of fascinating to to see what's going on at the neuronal level, because what happens is normally there's all kinds of neuronal firing going on throughout the day. When you go into slow wave sleep, all of your neurons turn off at the same time in a coordinated way, in a pulsing way. And then some of them come back on, but they keep doing this pulsing of turning off. And that pulsing creates a wave that can be picked up on by electrodes. And so that's what characterizes deep sleep. And it turns out that these um, periods of deep sleep are mostly concentrated at the beginning of the night, and they have intensity that is proportional to like the size of that wave. And it's more intense at the beginning of the night. And then there are like all these ideas about why would the brain need to do that. um, and then the other component, main component of sleep is REM sleep, which is associated more with dreaming. And you have the brain is actually very active. It used to be called paradoxical sleep because of that. The brain is really, really active, but the connection between your brain and your motor neurons gets turned off, presumably so you don't act out whatever you're doing while you're dreaming. Dreaming isn't exclusively the realm of REM, but it's highly associated with it. So these two kinds of stages basically alternate, and yeah, scientists are trying to figure out what those different things do. One idea that I think is particularly compelling and well evidenced is that during the slow wave sleep part, neurons get pruned, and so the brain only has so much room, and it's really a highly energy intensive organ to use. And so if you're learning all these things, you're making all these connections, you're growing all this neuronal weight, it becomes unsustainable. And so the idea is that during slow wave sleep, a whole bunch of stuff gets pruned away, and then REM helps build back and strengthen the connections that survive.
Wow, I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah, really cool.
Wow, that's super cool. So, what things did you end up learning about the relationship between diet and sleep? I will ask the question that you already addressed in your presentation, which I think all of us just think, yeah, when I eat a lot of turkey at Thanksgiving, I get really tired because of the tryptophan. And it seems like it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's long been this association noticed between the amount of energy that you eat and the duration that you sleep. So, for example, people who are undergoing lab-induced weight gain, their sleep duration will increase. And likewise, people who are undergoing weight loss, their sleep will decrease. And then people with anorexia in particular have really short sleep. They can't, it seems to mostly affect REM actually because they seem to be wide awake most of the last third of the night. And when people with anorexia are recovering, their sleep duration also recovers. It used to be thought that the association between energy intake, there was noticed an association between energy intake and sleep duration as well, and it used to be thought to be only from carbohydrates, but further study revealed that fat intake also does that. So, so that's really interesting. But duration itself is a little bit deceptive because of the intensity of slow wave sleep that I mentioned. So you can have well, first of all, there could be time in bed where you're not really asleep a lot of the time and you're not getting any of these sleep stages. You're waking often, even if you don't necessarily notice that you're waking. You could have really poor sleep efficiency. Um, with it still looking like the duration is essentially the same. But even if your sleep is fairly efficient in terms of not very many wakings or not a lot of time spent awake, there's this concept of intensity of the slow wave activity. And the more intense your slow wave activity is, the more it dissipates this sleep need that that sleep drive that we talked about. So you get more and more tired throughout the day, and the more slow wave sleep activity you have, the quicker that drive drops off. So if you had, you could imagine having like say 3 periods of slow wave sleep, but the brain waves are only getting so high, and it doesn't dissipate that sleep drive as much as if the first one was really high, which it tends to be. But the depth of that intensity is correlated with how much energy your brain was using. So there are a variety of different things actually that can drive up the energy in the brain and give you a higher intensity of slow wave sleep. So heating the body will do it, exercise will do it, meditation will do it. But it turns out that ketogenic diets also seem to increase slow wave sleep and slow wave activity in general. And because of that, it seems to me that a ketogenic diet should be able to shorten your sleep duration, not because not because you're getting less sleep in a bad way, but actually because your sleep is becoming more intense and therefore is taking care of the needs of slow wave sleep in a shorter period of time.
Wow. And that again, that matches up with a lot of the anecdote I've heard from people who start this, way of life, lifestyle, and yeah, they seem to need less sleep and have better energy than they did before. And that's consistent with your findings.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. And you also mentioned a few other things that can help. You mentioned heating the body. So we just added a sauna like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I absolutely love it, even though it's the middle of summer here in Salt Lake City. Like it's plenty hot. I don't need to get hotter. But I noticed for sure that like if I used it during the day, it was great. But if I use it right before bed, I have amazing sleep. And I just thought this was like a body temperature thing. I'm heating up my body, so my body's going to compensate. I'll sleep a little bit cooler. Are there other things going on there? And again, is that consistent with your findings?
Yeah, there could be two components going on. So the heating of the body itself, at least in some of the research I looked at, it seems to create this more energy in the brain, which then would correlate to a higher intensity of the slow wave activity. But in addition to that, there may be a kind of vasodilation effect because which would affect not the sleep intensity or duration necessarily, but your sleep onset time. Because one of the things that happens when you're going to sleep is that your body cools down in preparation for sleep. And the way that it does that is by increasing blood flow to the limbs in order to release heat so that your body can cool down very quickly. And you can kind of trick your body into thinking that it's going to sleep by warming up your limbs because that sensation of that temperature differential is a signal that it's time to go to sleep. And so that can shorten your time from hitting the pillow and falling asleep. So you could have been getting both of those effects.
Wow, that is super interesting. In your talk, you also bring up satiety, which I think is fabulous. You have a wonderful definition of this. And I will say, if you don't mind, if you could share the definition that you like the most about satiety. We went to a Brazilian steakhouse this weekend and
Ooh.
like nonstop. I kid you not, for like an hour. They were way overstaffed. The food was amazing. We got there early. Every 20 to 30 seconds, it seemed like there was a new platter of food coming around. And we were like nonstop for a full hour. Another piece of pecan, you're like, oh, okay, yes, yes, please. And you get to this, the food is so tasty, and then it becomes a little bit more neutral, and then you almost have this like weird aversion to it. Like, and I've kind of tried to help people understand the difference between satiety and fullness in that way. And I love the definition that you have. And can you share that definition with us? And can you also tell us what that has to do with sleep quality?
Yeah, the definition is from Nicolaitis, who was a researcher in sleep and in satiety. And I don't know it necessarily by heart, but it is something like satiation is the progression from the thought of food being appealing to the thought of food becoming actually disgusting or unappealing, let's say, unappealing. And I think that that really makes sense. Like, we're always trying to find markers for things physiologically in the body. Like, we've noticed that, say, leptin, when leptin goes up, satiation or satiety goes up, or when ghrelin goes up, it's associated with hunger. But then sometimes we kind of replace the territory with the map and we're saying, oh, ghrelin means hunger, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, and it's only true insofar as it lines up with the actual thing we're trying to measure, which is, do I want more food right now or not? So yeah, that's the definition that I really liked
I
because
love that.
it gets to what we really care about.
Yeah, eating a kale salad, you can definitely get full, but you're not satiated in that same way. You're going to be very hungry in 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah. So that's satiety. How does that relate to sleep quality?
Right. So we talked about energy in the brain. Um, without getting too technical, there are some results of energy use, including the neurochemical adenosine and including reactive oxygen species again, where the more that they build up, the more is associated with sleep drive building up, and they may actually be the factors that are leading to sleepiness. Both of those things, reactive oxygen species and adenosine, are the direct result of energy use. Adenosine is a byproduct of ATP generation, and so are reactive oxygen species. And so, in the whole body, if you're using energy, there can be byproducts that get into the bloodstream that are noticed by the brain, but the brain actually also has in the hypothalamus a kind of simulator, if you will, where the bloodstream is going by and whatever's happening in the hypothalamus can reflect what it can be inferred to be happening in the rest of the body. So if you have a bloodstream that's flush with energy, then your cells are going to use that and your metabolic rate's going to go up and these byproducts are going to build up. And that's directly one of the ways in which our brain determines that we've had enough. But it's also directly related to the signals that ultimately generate sleepiness. And so that ties back to having eaten more energy, resulting in more sleep duration, but also just as a signal for when it's time to sleep. The more energy that you've used, the more it seems that sleep drive kicks in.
Wow.
And
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Go ahead.
one thing that's really interesting about that is you would expect if a ketogenic diet ramps up um, adenosine in the brain, which it does, and energy use in the brain, which it appears to, um, you would expect that a ketogenic diet would make you more tired. It doesn't seem to be the case, and that's where another magical neurochemical comes in, which is orexin. Orexin also has this cool um, overlay between sleep and appetite. So it's called orexin. You might recognize the root from anorexia, which means no appetite. Orexin is an appetite regulator, and so the higher orexin is in the brain, the more hungry you should be. Um, and a ketogenic diet, oddly enough, raises orexin at the same time as it raises adenosine, and these should have opposite effects. So the more adenosine you have, the sleepier and more satiety you should have, and the higher orexin is, the hungrier and more wakeful you should be. But it seems to be that because it raises them both and because they have mutual inhibition, that what it looks like to me is that a ketogenic diet allows you to have higher adenosine in the body without the same level of sleepiness that you would have if you just had adenosine without the opposing orexin.
Fascinating. That's so fascinating. So what would be some of the key takeaways practically that you might recommend for somebody to implement some of these things? Does this affect your meal timing, your meal frequency? Should you always eat, a certain few hours before bed? How has all of this research kind of changed your way of thinking about that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not always very practically minded, so I'm glad that you put it to me that way. um, one thing, um, so a lot of people report that on a ketogenic diet, they sleep less, but it's in a good way, right? Like we talked about, where you feel like you actually need less. You slept less time, but you still feel refreshed. But other people have reported that they're sleeping less and they're actually feeling like they're experiencing something more akin to insomnia, and it's not restful. And so what I would say is if you're in that position, you should look at your energy intake. Maybe you're not eating enough fat in particular to generate the energy to allow you to sleep. So that's one practical takeaway. You mentioned about timing. There's some really interesting circadian effects that we didn't get into at all, but insulin insulin resistance is higher um, going to get this backwards. uh, Insulin sensitivity is higher in the morning, and so there's some argument for eating most of your meals toward the beginning of the day, even though you definitely want to make sure that you're at a point of satiety when you go to bed.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, I love that. So I'm going to take that to say that I can continue having my giant cast iron skillet full of meat around 6 or 7 p.m. I can keep taking my sauna around 8, 8:30 and go to bed at 9, and that's a good night.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too.